Thank you very much for that, Kim, and thank you, Catalyst, for inviting me here to speak. Some of you guys I've already spoken to, and you'll have a bit of an understanding about what reef credits are, so sorry if I go over some background that you already know about, but I think I better start from scratch. But I also have some updates because we've been a bit absent for the last few months, and I'll explain why that is and what's happening. Green Collar is a private sector company, and we are in the business of environmental markets. So from the public's point of view, we're providing a public benefit of environmental benefits, but from the farmer's point of view, this is an economic decision. Either it works for you economically or it doesn't, and that's how we like to deal with farmers. This is the button, I presume. So, there we go. Reef credits, they're a bit like, I suppose, carbon credits in water quality. They're a market instrument that pays for ecosystem services, and I know in all the years I've been involved in public life and farming and so on, that farmers have always been said, well, how come we're not paid for the ecosystem services that we can deliver to the public? And that's a very fair question, and that hasn't existed in the reef space until Green Collar, before my time, came up with this idea of a reef credit. So what it does is it pays for an outcome. Whereas a lot of the grants into farming and water quality has been a grant, and someone gets a bit of money and you hope for the best, and it might or it might not work. In the case of the reef credit, it's getting paid for what you've actually delivered in a measured and verified way. And what that does is it allows an investor to say, I know what I'm buying. I'm buying a known quantity of water quality improvement. And that's what brings the investors in. Whether you're government or the private sector or whatever, you need to know what you're buying, and that hasn't really existed in the reef space. Look at it as another commodity, just like cane or cattle. It's a product that you can produce on the farm and that you can sell into the market to earn additional revenue for yourselves and for the regional economy. Yes, it's a service. It's not a widget or a chattel or it's a service which can earn you money. And it's a program that if this is going to work, the system has to be trusted across all sectors, across the industry, science, government, conservation, etc. have to trust that this is a real product, that it delivers a measurable improvement to water quality. And you can say, well, I'm spending this much money and I'm getting this much improvement in water quality out of it. I don't know that I need to spend much time on this, just to say that we're all aware now that the threats to the reef are both from climate change and water quality. I guess for the last 100 years it's been more water quality, but now it's climate change. We know what the official outlook is, I don't need to labour that. But the point I would like to make is that if the reef is to be resilient in a changing climate, or to adapt to a changing climate, we don't really know what's going to happen, you need clean water. So from our point of view, clean water is absolutely fundamental to the future of the reef. An environmental market has quite a big architecture or structure around it. It's not, it has to be independent. As I said, it has to be trusted, it has to be verified, and so on. So you start off with a guide and a standard, and they're a bit like the constitution of an organisation or a country or a club or whatever. It sets the rules, it sets the principles, and so on. You need a registry where the reef credits are traded, held, sold, a bit like a stock exchange. You need governance. At the moment, the company that I'm in has set this up, and the interim governance is a steering committee of Green Collar, North Queensland Dry Tropics and the Wet Tropics. But it will move to an independent governance, and other players will no doubt come in, just like the carbon market. You've got multiple players, and they have to conform to a set of rules that everyone agrees with. The critical thing for farmers, I think, is the methodologies. The methodologies are the correlation between the practice and the water quality outcome. And that's the bit that has taken a lot of time to develop. And it's the bit where you need all of the different sectors, as I said, science, industry, government, conservation, to say, yep, we believe that this practice will lead to this outcome. And then you have projects or sellers, and you have buyers. So the projects or the sellers are the landowner or the farmer or the grazier that creates the reef credit by the practices they adopt. And the buyers are everything from the corporate sector to government to philanthropy. Whoever wants to, in one way or another, make a contribution to water quality, we would argue that the most cost-effective way and accountable way is to buy reef credit. So going through some of those points, starting at the bottom, the sellers are the growers. We've got about 65 farmers all the way from along the entire coast that are in the pipeline, and they're people, and there's some of you in this room, that we've either just approached and we're still talking, right through to people who have already signed a contract. And the buyers are the corporate sector, the government, the philanthropists, as I've said, and there's about $1 million now in the pipeline of people who have committed to buying reef credits. The first one was Qantas. The Wet Tropics Major Integrated Project committed to buy $300,000, and we've just had another buyer in who's going to buy $700,000 of them. It's our job to find the buyers. That's what we do. We help the landowner create the credits, we find the buyers, and we join them up. I can't say who that new group is now, but it'll be announced shortly, and we'll all know. We largely know what the solutions are, and this is the forum, I think, that best knows what the solutions are. And it's my view that there's farmers in this forum whose farming practices have already reached a point where you're not contributing to poor water quality. There are some really fantastic, innovative farmers, and I would say that we do know what to do, not entirely, but we know a lot about it. There's always more stuff, there's always continuous improvement. So a lot of this is about adoption of the practices that some of you leading guys have already worked out. And they're a combination of agricultural practice and restoring ecosystems, such as putting wetlands back into the landscape, or sediment traps, or riparian vegetation. And they're not cheap, they cost money, and hopefully the reef credit is the way that you pay for that. A methodology update. We've got 3 foundation methodologies, but what the methodology does is, as I mentioned before, it defines the correlation between the practice you do and the outcome that you're going to get. And so if you're an investor, you're Qantas, and you say, well, I fly a lot of people to the reef and I'm a big part of tourism and I want to be seen to be a good guy and I want to contribute to helping the reef. Those people want to know that what they're buying is a quantifiable amount of improvement to water quality. And if you say to them, just make a donation to the reef, they say, what am I going to get for it? Well, we don't really know, but we'll help you buy a piece of equipment for a farmer or do some extension. So what result's that going to get? We don't really know. The reef credit defines that, quantifies, it measures and it verifies that product. And that's the bit that's got to be trusted. It can be measured or modelled, and we've talked a lot about, you're all familiar with modelling and measuring. Some things are very hard to do or expensive, so to model the water quality that comes off an individual farm is possible, but it's not easy because some of it goes underground, some of it across the surface, some of it in episodic events, and you might go a few years where you get no heavy rainfall and not much runs off. So to actually measure an individual farm one at a time is really difficult. So what you do is you use the latest science, and there's plenty of it out there, not always right, it never will be, but you use what's available to model it, and your monitoring then feeds back into the model, and over time you model the performance, feed it back, and that's the way the carbon market works. So you're a grazier out west, and you earn some carbon credits by allowing some regrowth to happen, and you use the formula that the government supplies. It's not completely right, But what project developers like Greencollar do, because that's been their business as the carbon market, is they monitor that, they report back, they have to do that as part of the process. CSIRO has got the contract of collecting all the reports from all the different companies that do it, such as Greencollar, and that feeds back into the system and you get a continual improvement. So your forest growth indexes, which is what you're measuring, for every part of Australia continually improves and you get better and better. And that's the way reef credits are going to have to go. If you wait till everything's perfect and the science is perfect, you'll never start, because it never is. So you start with what you know, you measure, you monitor, and you continually improve. We have 3 foundation methodologies in the pipeline, and it's one of the reasons that we've been offline for a little while. Getting a methodology, that correlation between practice and outcome, is no easy job, because the scientists don't agree, the government doesn't agree, and you've got to find something that all of those parties agree with. So the first methodology, which has just been approved a couple of weeks ago, it's been through the hoops, been peer reviewed, it's been up for public comment, and the various sectors related to this industry have said that they're happy with it now. None of them are perfectly happy, but certainly, I'll just come back to the nitrogen method in a minute and give you a bit more detail. The next one is a wetland methodology, and that's near completion, not too far away. And the third methodology is a gully erosion methodology, which wouldn't affect too many of you. It's more about the gully erosion that you get in extensive grazing landscapes in the rangelands, and I'm sure some of you have seen those horrific gullies that have been there for 50 or 100 years, and that's where most of the sediment on the reef is coming from. And that one will be measured, because you can measure that stuff. The wetland one, probably a bit of measurement and a bit of modelling. The dissolved inorganic nitrogen one will be a modelled one, until we reach the point where it's cost effective to measure each farm. Obviously better to measure than to model, but if you can't afford to or it doesn't work, you have to model. So the dissolved inorganic DIN reduction methodology, it began with a very simple measure that says if you put less on, we'll reward you for that. And the logic of that came out of CSIRO, that said with their nitrogen auction in the Johnson catchment, for example, they said, well, about 17% of what goes onto the farms ends up out of the reef. So really simple, just pay a farmer 17% of whatever they reduce, and that can be your reef credit. Reef credit is defined as 1 kilogram of dissolved inorganic nitrogen that doesn't go out to the reef. And we started off that way, and on average that would work. But it wouldn't be very equitable between the farmers, and of course the amount of nitrogen that leaves your farm is affected by a whole host of things. One is the amount that you put on, but it's the soil type, it's the rainfall, it's your tillage regime, it's your fallow crops, it's the distance from the sea, it's slope, it's all of those sorts of things. So one of the criticisms we got with that first iteration of our methodology was that you're just paying us to reduce what we want as a nitrogen use efficiency methodology. And of course, that's correct, but it's difficult. And I'd like to think that we do have a nitrogen use efficiency methodology now, because it takes account of crop size as well. Before it didn't. It takes account of all of those other things I measured. And so the way this will work is that you'll be measured against a baseline of 7 years. 4 years of your farmer record, 3 years of industry standard, that's averaged out on both practices and on your application rate, and any improvement you make on that is what you're paid for. And that payment goes every year for 10 years, and at the end of the 10 years, the baseline starts all over again. So it's I think the nitrogen auction that the government went for was a 4-year one. We've decided to go for 7 years, for 10 years. And each year that you've improved against that baseline, not against the previous year, it's not a continuous improvement thing, but each year you've made an improvement against that baseline, you'll earn reef credits. If you decide it didn't work and hey, I reduced my nitrogen too much, my crop's going down, I'm going to go back to what I was, that's fine. There's no penalty, but you're not going to get paid for it. The wetland methodology. Wetlands are able to abate a lot of nitrogen in ideal conditions, and they do that by denitrification. They take the nitrates and nitrites and they denitrify that, and what comes off is N2, which is the inert gas, which is what most of the atmosphere is now. But it only works under certain conditions. Number one, the water's got to be in there for at least 3 to 5 days. If you get a flood event and it all washes through and it's there for an hour, it isn't going to work. And it also has to have a catchment. So, I mean, a wetland isn't going to be much help if it's coming straight off a landscape that has no dissolved inorganic nitrogen in it. And that methodology is close to finalisation now, and we've got a few potential projects in the pipeline about that. And of course, wetlands can deliver what we'd call co-benefits. There's other benefits. You can maybe get some carbon credits out of it. It can store some carbon. It's habitat, it's fisheries, it's biodiversity. There's a whole lot of co-benefits, some of which can be paid for and some of which can't. We call that monetising co-benefits. There's going to be other methodologies coming along. These are early days. This is going to be many years in the development. So there's nothing yet about pesticides. Grazing management in rangelands, whilst we have a gully erosion methodology, we don't have a grazing land management where you're looking at ground cover and surface erosion. We'll probably end up with a phosphorus reduction one and a soil health one, and I'm going to come back to soil health in a minute. And in the carbon market, there's, I think our last count was about 38 different methodologies that account from everything from landfill to piggery effluent to keeping standing forest to letting trees regrow. And we'll find as time goes on that you need a few other methodologies to start filling gaps, because these early ones won't meet the needs of everybody. Now, Green Collar's made its money out of carbon credits. Green Collar's the largest supplier of Australian carbon credit units in Australia. And it's used that expertise and its resources to set up a marketplace in reef credits. Like I said, a bit like a carbon credit, but for water quality. Once this system's up and running, there's going to be other players. We'll have competition. It'll be independently run. And I guess we just hope that we're in there early enough that we're going to get back our money. But Green Collar's invested a lot in this. They've been employing me for a couple of years. There's other people in the technical teams. It's been a big investment for Reef Collar to set up this marketplace and all that governance structure and architecture that I mentioned before. It's not been easy. It's been a bit unpredictable. We've run into a few road bumps, but we think we're about ready to really kick the thing off now. We would like to think, and I think this is correct, that what's good for your bottom line tends to be good for the environment. If you're on minimal till, multiple species cover crops, controlled traffic, variable rate fertilisers and so on, that's good for your bottom line. It's also good for the environment. So we would like to think that in pretty much all instances, this isn't a choice between a good environmental outcome and a good economic outcome. We believe it's good for both, and therefore it makes sense. And as I said earlier, we go to farmers on the basis, is this good for your farm bottom line or not? We're not asking you to say, we want you to spend your money on fixing the environment, because you can't necessarily afford to do that. It's a nice thing to do, but you have to be guided by what's good for your farm economy. And that's how we talk about it. And they're an economic opportunity for farmers is how we see it. And we've discovered through many of our clients that they're doing many of these things. They're not doing it to improve water quality. They're doing it for their farm bottom line. But by the way, it does improve water quality, and many of them are the big farmers. So we've sort of road tested it in that way, and we're pretty confident that's correct. And many of those people will say that if they hadn't made those sorts of changes, and they're big farmers, they wouldn't be in there today doing it. I've been on extended leave. I bailed out of the company about 6 months ago. I said, look, I've had enough. I'm going to hit 70 soon. I want to retire and I'm burnt out and blood pressure's gone up and time for me to quit and do something else. And they said, look, please don't go, which is very nice of them. Take 6 months off and come back to a job of your choice. So I said, that's a pretty good offer, I'll do that. So the job that I was doing, I'll just come back to who's going to be doing that now, but my role in the future is going to be representing the company at forums like this, both presenting and listening and learning and reporting back. And I'm going to be working on 2 new methodologies. One is a soil health methodology. My intuition is telling me that if your soil health is really good, there's not going to be much leaving your farm. You won't need as much nitrogen. The nitrogen that you do put on is not going to leave because it's tied up in the biodiversity and the biota and the soil health. Good for your bottom line, but it's not an easy one to crack. But if we can develop a relationship between soil health and water quality, that will be a new methodology. The science isn't there. Well, maybe the science is and it just hasn't been correlated. Lawrence is filling me in and telling me that we're getting very close, and Lawrence will be one of the first people I go to see when I start researching that. But I think that in terms of cultivated landscapes, soil health is the way we've got to go. If you said that 10 years ago, that have said you're mad, all the soil does is hold the crop up and we feed it what it needs. But we've now learnt that for efficiency, for costs, for pathogens, for a whole lot of reasons, that soil health is suddenly becoming the holy grail for many people. And Green Collar's looking at other environmental markets as well, having started off in carbon credits, moving into water quality credits, plastics market, for example. Plastics is a big issue. How can we create a market that entices people to actually remove plastic from the ocean or stop putting it in there? So that's another challenging one that the company's set as a goal. Whether we pull it off or not, I don't know, but it's a company that's prepared to try those sorts of things. So the new appointments coming along, the people taking on my role that I was doing 6 months ago when I bailed out for a little while. The new General Manager of Water Quality is Carol Sweatman. A few people will know Carol, a few of you people will. She was up until recently, the CEO of Terrain, the Wet Tropics NRM group. And she's going to have responsibility for water markets in all their different forms, initially in the GBR, but of course nutrient runoff and water pollution isn't unique to the GBR. It happens in the Gippsland Lakes, it happens in the Peel Harvey in WA, it happens in the Great Lakes of America. It's not an uncommon problem. A guy called Tristan Robertson is going to be the business manager and farm liaison person, and we're putting on a technical person, because one of the issues that we had before was that we'd go and see a farmer, get the data, feed it down to Sydney, and it would take ages to get back, and we need the technical assessment capability up here, and it does require quite a bit of technical know-how to do that. So if you, I'll put up their contacts, if people are interested in a reef credit and want someone to come out and look at your farm and give you an assessment, talk to one of these guys, or let me know. The soil health, I did mention it before, and I probably don't need to say a lot about it, but I do want to start engaging with farmers, with science, with SRA, with anybody else that's interested in soil health, and try and gather the data that we need to create a methodology around soil health. So anyone that is putting that into practice and believes they've got some answers and solutions, I'd love to get your name, and over time I'll come and talk to you and try and put a package together that works for you. And we need to develop that robust correlation between soil health and water quality. Then you've got a market. Until you've got that, you don't have a market. It's quite simple. And it will be added to the others, the methodologies that are already there. And as I say, I'm sure there'll be more to come. I'm not thinking the grazing land management one's going to be fairly straightforward. We've already got pretty good correlations between ground cover and soil loss and so on. So that one's not going to be too hard. I think it's fairly straightforward. Probably doesn't concern anyone in this audience unless you've got a rangeland grazing property. And so the main one for you guys is going to be the nitrogen and the wetland ones. But there will be others. Like I say, people ask me questions, I want to do this, I want to do that, how's that going to fit? Well, one of the existing methodologies might work. If it doesn't, we might have to think of a new methodology. I'll leave those up. Having just started work again yesterday after 6 months off, I'm sorry I forgot to bring any business cards with me. I probably forgot a lot of other stuff too. If you want my name, address, contacts, feel free to come and talk to me, and next time I come around I'll have some business cards with me. So I've tried to keep that fairly quick and an overview, because I think maybe the most valuable part of this will be the questions that you guys have got and whether I can answer them or not. So I'd like to, at this stage, open the floor for questions, comments, good or bad, and I'm all ears. And hopefully I can fill in a few gaps for you.
Thanks. Evan Shannon from Pharmacist. I had two questions.